The views expressed in the following podcast are not necessarily the views of the United States Air Force or the Air Force Reserve, but rather the perspectives of the individual speakers. No endorsement of any particular person, business, or interest is ever intended.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of Ready, Set, Airlift in 2025. I'm your host, Julian Hernandez from the 433rd Airlift Wing Public Affairs team. We hope you all had a good holiday season with loved ones. Hopefully you had a good mix of fun and rest. On today's episode, we're getting an opportunity to learn more about the Alamo Wing's new senior enlisted leader. Command Chief Jonathan Birk joined the 433rd in October. We wanted to discuss with him how his transition to the Alamo Wing is going and find out about his expectations for the unit moving forward. Chief Birk, thank you so much for making time to join me today here on Ready, Set, Airlift. I want to get started with kind of a fundamental question here. You've only recently joined the wing, so many airmen probably haven't had a chance to get to know you. Let's start with a little bit about your Air Force story, your journey to this point.
So as I've been started visiting airmen around the wing, the common question that I'm usually getting is, Chief, you're coming all the way from Hawaii? To dissuade that rumor, I'm a California desert boy, born and raised. I still reside in California, so I'm actually commuting to San Antonio from the Los Angeles area. To give you a little idea about my Air Force journey, so I actually had no desire to join the military. I grew up in a small remote town near Fort Irwin, California. I worked at that Army base in high school and saw how the Army did things and wanted nothing to do with the military. I graduated and I went to San Diego State where I played football in the practice squad there, and life was good. I was studying kinesiology. I wanted to become a athletic trainer for a professional sports team. And one winter I was sitting in bed and opened up my FAFSA and saw that I was going to have to take out some more loans. I had some academic scholarships and some grants, but I didn't want more loans. I saw an Air Force Reserve recruiter commercial come on and thought, hey, they're offering money for college. So I walked into the office, and unfortunately I weighed what a college football player should weigh and not what the Air Force wants you to weigh. So I had to lose 70 pounds. It took 5 months to lose the first 60 pounds and then 3 months to lose the last 10. But I did it, and I ended up enlisting in August of 2001. The next month, 9/11 happened, and as we all know, the world changed, and I never went back to San Diego State University. Like many in this unit, I was actually at one unit for 16 years. March Air Reserve Base was my first base. That was my home. And now that I look back, a lot of the people that I served there with are either now commanders, they're SELs, or retired. While I was at March, I did deploy a lot. But one thing I like about deployments is you get a lot of great experience. I went to Mazira Island with the 507th Airlift Wing back in 2003 to kick off Operation Iraqi Freedom. And the one thing I like about deployments is it's a little bit of a culture shift because you get people from completely different areas of the country. And let me tell you, the Okies had a completely different culture than we did. I can still vividly remember we worked the night shift, the March Air Reserve guys, and the Okies worked the day shift. And we came in on night shift to get ready for the missions going out that night. And I pull up the pre-mission brief to start getting an idea of what was in the slides. And I see a picture of a dead mouse being propped up and placed in scenes to properly show how to escape and invade in case your aircraft was shot down. We didn't have much time to change those slides, so we rolled with it for the dozen missions that took off that night. And the Oklahoma air crews, they loved it, seeing those pictures. California guys cringed a little bit. Wasn't our cup of tea. When they came in the next morning, we found out they had killed a mouse that was running around the trailer and thought that it would be funny to help reinforce what escape and evasion is all about. And that was a big culture shock, I think, for all of us. And it took us a couple of months in that long deployment to figure each other out and work well together and thrive in that mission. I've been to a couple other places. For example, I was at Naval Air Station Key West. I went there for a counter drug mission. And that one was a culture shock because I went from being an Air Force reservist to now working in a Navy facility. The minor things I could get away with as being a reservist were not so minor with the Navy. And I started getting in trouble very quickly. And Navy leadership said, hey, we're going to send you home if you don't get everything together. I quickly fixed my military bearing, excelled at the job, and that was a lot of fun. And it was a great joint experience in learning that sometimes we got to do things the other services way. I also went over to the California Air National Guard, where that was a little bit of a culture shock. They have their own culture, and while reservists are pretty lax, I still found myself sometimes coming into conflict with the culture that they had over at the National Guard. But the bigger issue that I saw there was something that was highlighted in the Jack Ryan TV series a few years ago. We were working MQ-1 Predator missions. We're flying these aircraft over Afghanistan, Iraq, and we're remotely piloting them from Southern California. And what the Air Force didn't realize yet was we're sitting behind the screen, seeing these horrific things happening. We're doing kinetic strikes in response to those horrific things happening. And then when our 12-hour shift was up, we're going home to our family, our friends, and acting like nothing just happened 4 hours ago. And it wasn't healthy for people. And fortunately, leadership started seeing that. And not only was it a culture shock as far as working with the Guard, but also being exposed to warfare, but being at home. It made it feel a little bit like a video game, but real life. And then lastly, because many people do ask me, what's it like being an IMA? That was a huge change for me as well. That's where I made the decision that I had to leave March Air Reserve Base. It was a career field promotion for me. If I had stayed at March, yes, I could have become an SCL. I did want to stay in the intelligence career field as a senior enlisted leader. So I took the leap. But I will say for the first couple of years, I was trying my best to get back to MART, find any kind of job I could. Being an IMA is very challenging. If you take the admin challenges that we currently experience as a traditional reservist and magnify it by 100, you're ready to become an IMA. So I had to learn to become an IMA. I had to learn how to become a chief. I had to learn to deal with career fields I've never even dealt with before. For example, a linguist and all the things that they have to learn and to continually certify on. And also worked with active duty. And active duty doesn't speak reservist. So I had to change a lot of different things. And it was a lot of culture stuff. So I'm a storyteller, and I share all these stories to say as a reservist, you write your own story of your career. I decided I wanted to write my own story, and I didn't let others write that story for me. And I want to say, don't let others write your story for you. Excel at what you do. Know that you're going to make mistakes and own up to them. And don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone sometimes and pursue other opportunities, even if it means going to other units for a while and then making your way back.
Absolutely. And I want to key in on you're talking about your intelligence background there. That stood out to me because you've already had a chance to use that background and perspective in your time here at the Alamo Wing when the wing stand-ups in the November UTA, they were focusing on great power competition, integrating risk, and you were able to really bring a different perspective than I think other senior leaders here at the Alamo Wing were putting on the table. Could you summarize a little bit about what you mentioned at the stand-up for any of the airmen who didn't get a chance or need a refresh?
Yes. To give you another story, back in 2003, my superintendent at the time gave an intel brief about the Spratly Islands. We were getting ready to head into the Middle East, and he constantly reminded us that we could go to war one day over these tiny little reefs in the South China Sea. I remember it vividly. The picture he showed, there was this little reef that had a watchtower, a lighthouse, and a small building, and it was less than 2 acres in size. Flash forward 20 years later, and today that reef, which is known as the Fiery Cross Reef, I definitely go and look that up. It's now 741 acres. It has an active runway, can support the Chinese bomber fleet, has air defense missile systems, and a harbor for their Navy. What I briefed at the stand-up flows into this, where we've moved into this great power competition where we've seen China grow into a very strong military that at any time could create us to go into a conflict over various things, such as Taiwan, or maybe the various Spratly Islands that are throughout the South China Sea. Now, while the great power competition does have an INDOCOM-based focus, I feel that we have to always remember that Russia, Iran, North Korea are also involved in those. But when we look at China, there's a few dates that I mentioned that are thrown out there that are benchmarks for the Chinese military. Now, as Americans, we like to focus on dates. Then they put this date in there, so that means it's going to happen. Whereas culturally, other nations don't always necessarily focus on that date. But it does give us a goal for us to base our readiness on. So if we think 2027, it's the centennial celebration of the People's Liberation Army. Their leader, Xi Jinping, he directed the military needed to have the ability by the centennial in order to retake Taiwan. Then they have 2035 on their calendar, and that is the year that they needed the modernization of all their forces to be complete. Prior to about even 10 years ago, the Chinese military were using old Soviet weaponry and saw that, hey, we need to really get modernized. And then 2049 is the centennial of the People's Republic of China. And that's the year that they want to be a world-class military and be a global power like the United States is. So while these are benchmarked, if you look at some of the other dates, Taiwan actually thinks China is going to invade in 2025. By 2030, the United States will have our ability to manufacture the majority of our own semiconductors, negating the need to rely on sending these chips across the Pacific. And then by 2035, China has an aging population, and some of their previous policies, for example, the one-child policy, is really going to impact their ability to operate and be a big burden on their economy. Now, if we look at some of the other members, you have Russia. They're still in Ukraine and slowly grinding their forces to recapture territory. North Korea has sent troops to Russia, and some think eventually to go into Ukraine. And North Korea is modernizing their military as well. And then Iran, they're having significant challenges right now. And they just lost a huge ally in Syria with the rebels taking over that country. It becomes a truly global power competition. While the main focus, of course, is China and the Pacific, we do have to look at these other countries and see at any time they could be ready to try to tip the scales in global power to their side. One thing I'll throw in there, history repeats itself. And if you want to get more savvy on US and China relations, I recommend reading the book, The Beautiful Country in the Middle Kingdom by John Pomfret. This book covers our relationship from 1776 to about 2014. I will warn you, it is a commitment to read this book as it's 704 pages. But I guarantee you'll know more about China and understand things when you hear it in the news. Now, if you don't want to invest 704 pages of your time, I do recommend following foreign sources that are foreign news sources that are in Australia, the Philippines, Japan, even the BBC, to get a better understanding of what's going on. Unfortunately, here in the US, the media here doesn't always cover everything that's going on, and we miss out on a lot of stuff that's going on in that region that at any time could set us off.
And I think most of our airmen certainly understand that these changes are significant to the nation and the military as a broad entity. But maybe what if they asked you, Chief, what does all that mean to me right here? Like today, I'm going to do my job as an aircraft maintainer, or I'm going to do my job as an admin. Like, what does the latest and greatest on China or great power competition mean for me on the day-to-day?
The big thing is the whole concept of being ready now and transforming for the future. In my 20 plus years in the military, it was always pounded in my head early on that as a reservist, we needed to maintain our readiness and be ready to deploy within 72 hours to anywhere in the world. Can we do that today? I'm not so confident that we can. There was a little bit of a shift in the way that we did things. And I feel that now we're moving back to how we previously were set up. So when we look at being ready now, it's getting your readiness items taken care of. We're allowed to have profiles because life happens. But my hope is if you are on a profile, you're doing the rehab or figuring out the mediation efforts to get you back to being fully ready. In addition, being ready is being ready fitness-wise. You may find yourself on a humid Pacific island where I've been to some of those islands just for vacation, and it's rough, especially if you're wearing armor and all this gear you have to wear. Or maybe it's wintertime and you find yourself in Masaya Air Base and it's 10 degrees outside. You need to make sure you're physically ready as well. Then being ready also goes beyond the readiness items. For me personally as a chief, I want to make sure you have your upgrade training, your PME completed. So when that next opportunity, that deployment or promotion comes up, we can send you out the door because you truly are ready now. We have our plans at home ready for deployments. We always forget about that. The family care plan, the budgets, the power of attorney, and other items that sometimes we forget about until, hey, you're getting ready to deploy. The other side of it is that we're also taking care of our mental health and using the vast amount of resources that we have to us. Deployments bring hardships, and sometimes we don't think about some of those hardships that we have. And especially as we're trying to get out the door within 72 hours or a week or 2 weeks, sometimes we forget about a lot of those things. So being ready now means that we're prepared for that. On the other side, when we look at transforming for the future, I could say I started with the C-141 and it's no longer in the Air Force. It was replaced by the C-17 at my base. And we had to transform the way we developed our training, the way we did our analysis, even the way we supported our air crews because they were completely new airframes and we had to adapt. And just like our airframes, we also need to transform the way that we're doing things now. We've been in the Middle East for 20 plus years, and now we're moving to the Pacific. And that changes a lot of ways that we've done things in the past. It was very easy where, hey, we're just going to the Middle East. They don't have an Air Force. We don't have too much to worry about. We're going to the Pacific we're an enemy that can hit us with missiles, can hit us with aircraft and bombers, and all these things that completely change the way that we need to think about how we fight wars. So my challenge to the wing is let's transform our unit by discovering some more efficient techniques. We do some things pretty good. How can we make it more efficient? How can we remove duplication? How can we challenge yourself and your others? How can you go and pursue some of your career field opportunities? And how can we get into that mindset of how can I make my section, my squadron, my wing, and even the Air Force better?
I'm glad you keyed in on those two cornerstones of General Haley's task order, right? Because that is what we're operating around, at least on a strategic level from the day-to-day basis. So as the senior enlisted leader, I think it's going to come down to you to measure how the unit is living up or not to these two key metrics, if you will. How do you plan to measure if the unit is ready now and if it's appropriately transforming for the future?
So the easy answer would be, I see the metrics at the UTA meetings and the goal is we're trying to improve them. But realistically, I know that behind the numbers, there's usually compelling reasons why maybe we have some of these negative metrics. And some of it is the culture mindset. So during Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, we eventually got into this rhythm of, hey, your unit's going to deploy. You have 6 months to get all this training done before you go out the door. And I think over time, we just got into that where it's, I don't have to do some of this training. I don't have to take care of some of these items because I'm not deploying. And that's where we're getting back to that 72-hour window that I discussed, where we need to get to that mentality where we need to be ready now. And changing that mindset not only helps the metrics part of it that we see on the screen, but that's also where we can dig a little bit deeper in the data and start figuring out. We need our flu shot. You got to go to the doctor. You need to get your teeth checked every year. These are easy ones to measure. And if it's red, what's the why? Is it the med group's backed up with appointments and you're just a couple months late? You can't afford to go to the dentist to go see the civilian dentist? Is it because you don't want to do it? And that's where Colonel Jeffrey has asked the commanders and the SCLs to find out, why are we not getting it done? And what is the get well plan to get yourself green so we can get this and get that ready now? The metrics is the easiest way to do it. When we look at ready airman training, it's getting back to those basics of ensuring that we're constantly green. At any moment, the balloon goes off, is the popular statement, we're ready to go out the door. Because who wants to be sitting doing CVTs or self-aid buddy care 24 hours before you're supposed to get on an airplane and go to some little island in the Pacific, when really all you want to be doing is being with your family, making sure everything's set up. So with that concept of being ready now, that prevents that from happening. So you get to spend more time doing what it is you wanted to do in that short amount of time you have before you deploy. So I can see the steps taking place on how we're transforming for the future as well. That one is a little bit more difficult to measure, but it's a culture change going back to that. I did see, for example, in the last UTA, the Chiefs group held a TikTok threat brief. And what that tells me is the wing is thinking of that future threat. And we just need to get more people engaged and learning about it so they can go and tell their friends. And eventually throughout the wing, we have this thought process of, hey, we need to transform because it is a different threat. I've been engaging in some projects with some various individuals around the base, and seeing their ideas in the future that they have in mind helps me feel very comfortable that we are transforming. So as we continue to learn the threats, we continue to transform, and we get the why behind we need to do all this stuff. And I think it all comes down to that, just being able to answer that why. And if we can answer the why we need to do all this, it'll motivate people to want to transform, to make a better Air Force for themselves. And then once we can do that, that changes that culture. And that makes it easier to measure on how the culture of the wing is. Are we ready now? And are we transforming for the future?
You mentioned a critical part is establishing those get well plans, the corrective action plans, right? How are we getting from red to green? And from my reading of the task word, General Healy really puts that on NCOs, on upholding standards and ensuring that things are happening the way that they should be, right? What is your message to the Alamo Wing when it comes to holding troops accountable? And then how do you plan to hold your NCOs accountable?
The one thing I like about the task order is it gives us concrete details of the expectations for everyone at each level. And the standards is a big one. The one thing I've enjoyed is that the Air Force has relaxed a lot of those standards for good reasons, whether it's health with allowing women to have ponytails or 5-year shaving waivers, or others that are good for morale, hands in your pockets or unit patches with the wing tab patches. But I think the fallacy that we have as humans is we always still like to find those gray areas and try to push the limits to the rules. And if we're not held accountable for that little push that we're making, it gives a little bit of a door and we push that door open a little bit further and we keep going until we open the door completely, which sometimes those actions could get so extreme that now we're running into the pendulum swinging completely backwards. And a lot of those gains we made successfully are now being erased. I'll use beards for the example. The pilot program was recently removed from the Defense Authorization Bill that was making its way through Congress. And if we look at the total force in the Air Force, we have about 18,000 people that have shaving waivers, or about 3%. In the short time I've walked around the base, I see way more than 3% of just the wing population with beards. Now, I have no issues with beards as long as you're going and getting that shaving waiver, that religious waiver. But those that aren't doing it aren't being held accountable. And what it's doing is it's causing a ripple effect for those that are going through the process. One example I'll give you, because beards have become an issue at the higher levels, is a lot of wings now are starting to bring back shaving clinics. I had to go through one of those early in my career and just decided it was easier to shave and cut myself all the time than spend the massive amount of time going to these clinics. Now, I learned a lot, and years later, I've gotten pretty good at barely cutting myself anymore, but they were time consuming, an hour or two days a week. Each one was different, but the ones I went to, it just took a lot of time. So I'm a firm believer that those without the waivers are creating these negative perceptions about beards towards those that do. So when it comes to holding each other accountable, my message to the wing is airmen, NCOs, senior NCOs, chiefs, and the officers, hold your people accountable to the standards. When we start letting the little things slide, we start looking the other way. And before we know it, we have a massive snowball coming our way and we can't get out of it. And it just creates a bigger issue. I'm starting with the chiefs and the wing staff and ensuring that we're all holding each other accountable for the standards and also professionally. We're working on fixing on some of the glaring issues that we have. And we're trying to bring back that culture of holding people accountable. And as I do make my visits around the base, I may ask you, what are you doing about the standards in your section?
Yeah, it's a critical part. It's one of the big things that differentiates military life from civilian life is there is regulation and codes and policies that must be followed. So it is a huge part of discipline. I know I served in the Army in active duty, and shaving was a day-to-day crisis. Every morning, inspect the formation, make sure everybody's shaved. So it does play a role in establishing that discipline and military bearing. I want to transition to talking about Colonel Jeffrey's commander's intent. And so as his senior enlisted leader, I'm sure a big part of your focus is going to be ensuring the wing is operating within that intent. Do you have some priorities you want to tackle in the months ahead to really help push the wing even more in line with his intent?
So in the 3 months that I've been there, I'm be honest, I'm still trying to figure out even where all the buildings are. I just found out recently that a lot of our units don't even have space on campus and they've been all over the place. So when it comes to tackling many of his intents, the main thing that I've been leaning on since I've arrived is my chiefs group. My group SCLs, we talk, if not every day, at least a few times a week, as I'm trying to get a bigger picture of the condition of what the wing enlisted force is, and then working on some of those priorities to get how to engage them. I know there's a lot of great people in the wing, and in the few months assigned, I've seen a lot of those great people step up to the challenges and knock it out of the park. I've come across supervisors that truly care for their people and want to ensure the best for them. And I've even seen on many of our base organizations hold various workshops to help people's career. So I know that foundation is strong. The priorities is to continue to build that strong enlisted force. So in the next calendar year, my goal is to work with all of the chiefs in our wing, not just the group SCLs, and make them better leaders and mentors. In the past, I've worked with getting a strong chiefs group, and I've seen that a strong chiefs group creates a strong senior NCO corps. A strong NCO corps leads to a strong rising six. The ways to do this is we need to develop our people in and out of the career field, including the chiefs. I need to work on developing them, making sure that they're great chiefs and not just E9s. Providing timely and constructive feedback all up and down across the board. Also, as a supervisor, asking for feedback. A lot of times we don't ask for feedback from our people, and maybe we create an environment where it's difficult for them to give that feedback. But be willing to take it and see where am I blind at and how can I lead my people better. Also, finding those opportunities for people to excel. There's a lot of opportunities in the career field. There's lots of deployments, orders, all these different things that could allow people to go out and grow. And lastly, understanding that the timing for growth isn't always right for some. Maybe you met all the check boxes, but you're not ready to promote just yet. We need to work on a few things. And maybe for others, it is that time. You've been kicking butt and let's get you promoted. I want everyone at every rank, whether you're E1 all the way up to E9, you're empowering everyone at that rank to find a place for them to succeed. And lastly, we're holding each other and even your leadership accountable and making sure that we're meeting the mission and that we're taking care of our people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to tackle Colonel Jeffrey's priority as far as mentoring. He's very focused on ensuring that leaders are mentoring the next up and coming crop to take the reins. What are your expectations when it comes to mentoring, either when you're going to mentor senior NCOs or when senior NCOs are mentoring their airmen?
I feel mentorship is a top priority. Everyone at every rank should have a mentor, a mentee, and a peer that they can bounce things off. Working with the group SCLs, I presented them my intentions on how to improve ways we can find some of these holes that we have on developing our people and mentoring them. I believe if we can establish a guide at the chief level with the supervisors themselves and figure out what your people want to accomplish in the near term, 3 years, 5 years, is a great step for a supervisor to lead their people. It allows you to figure out what they're missing in their package, what they've accomplished, how they compare in their goals to their peers. And then it allows you to place people in the right situations to help them meet their goals and help them develop. A lot of time people get put into things that they don't want to do, and they may drag their feet the entire time till they're moved from it. And you go from being a top performer to just they come in for the weekend and don't do much else than that. The other side of it is the member themselves being proactive. And if your supervisor is not mentoring you, talk to them or keep going and find an actual mentor. Also participate in the development team boards for your career field. Your functional has a bigger pulse on the career field and can not only provide that needed mentorship and development points, but also can put you in certain locations that may help you grow and develop and meet some of those goals you want. And then getting ready for the next generation. You should be training your replacement now and develop others to be that replacement. If you're not developing them, you're leaving them siloed and they don't get to do much. They're not doing their job. So letting them learn everything it is that you're doing now, because eventually you're going to retire, maybe you separate, maybe you move, and then that person's taking your spot. And if they don't know what to do, it creates a big gap. And the other thing is fill your vacancies. You can't prepare for your replacement if the seat behind you is empty. And that's a big thing that we have at the wing that we're trying to fix is we need to start filling a lot of these vacancies so we can find those replacements.
One of the things I like to discuss with senior leaders, and it follows along that vein of mentorship, is thinking back to that early time in your career. You've got all this experience now that you've learned through your Air Force journey and becoming a chief and leading. Let's put that in a way that a new airman, a senior airman, even a brand new NCO, what does that look like from their level? My question would be, if Chief Birk could go back and talk to young Airman Birk, what advice would you give yourself?
The first thing I would tell me is ask for help. I had a supervisor that would tell me to go find the answer rather than helping me or even guide me. Years later, I understand why he did it, that whole teach him how to fish concept rather than just giving him the fish. But I would spend all day looking for the answer and he wouldn't help me at all. It wasn't really teaching me how to fish. Eventually, I just stopped asking him. because it was just a waste of time. Why go ask him? And then he's just going to make me go look up this stuff and have to find the answer. I just started doing it on my own, making mistakes. And unfortunately, since I didn't go ask him, it led to many programs that we were doing falling out of regulations because I wasn't following the regulations since I didn't go ask. So if you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to ask why. And I never went and would ask them, hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can you help me? Just show me where it is so I can find where I need to go. And I'll admit, even as a command chief, there's many things I don't know about. And that's why if I'm asking you questions, it's because I usually don't understand. And I'm just trying to reach that why so I can figure out better ways to serve you. Secondly, what I tell myself is take better care of yourself professionally. It took me 12 years in the reserve before I figured out that taking care of others is great, but I can't take care of them if I'm not taking care of myself. As a Master Sergeant, I didn't know how to write EPRs, decorations, award packages. I didn't understand manpower, budgeting, or even really how to develop my people properly. And I was getting ready to put on Senior Master Sergeant and realized, how am I helping people if I can't help myself and don't know how to do all these things? And how many people have I let down because I don't know how to do these things? So learn how to do these things early in your career and you'll be a great supervisor. And then you can mentor and pass that on to the future great supervisors that will be there long when we're gone.
I was lucky to have some pretty good leaders and mentors when I was in uniform. And when I was becoming an NCO, one of the main lessons they imparted on me is your job as an NCO isn't to know everything, but it is to know how to get the answer on just about everything or who to hit up for help. That stuck with me, and I'm glad you share that perspective as well. We talked a little bit offline that resiliency is a huge subject area that you want to focus on in your time as SEL. So can you share a time when you faced a significant personal or professional challenge and then talk about some of those strategies that you used to overcome that?
If you have the chance to sit down with me and you ask me to ask you a story, I have lots of stories to tell, as I keep saying. But I'll tell you, the biggest personal challenge in my life was shortly after my son was born. I grew up in a single parent home, and my mom was my cornerstone, my champion, my cheerleader, everything in my life. For a few months prior to him being born, she began her downward spiral in health. At that time, I assumed my mom was going to recover because she always did. She had open heart surgery. She got back to normal not too long after, lived way past what they expected her to. As my son was getting ready to be born, my mom's health turned terminal, and I still refused to accept that. She was going to bounce back like she always did. I took the doctor's advice and I placed her in hospice care, as I couldn't care for her while I'm also at the hospital with my wife in labor. But I knew I was going to get her out once we got back home because she's fine. In that small time that I was there, she continued to get worse, and I had to go fight with the hospice to let me bring her to the hospital to see her grandson. I was successful, and then I fought them again to let them bring my son into the hospice so she could visit her grandson. I also had to fight with my wife a little bit on that. I have my mom whose health is rapidly declining. I have a newborn son that refuses to sleep. My wife, who ended up having a C-section, is recovering from that, and then also stressing over latching difficulties while breastfeeding. And I had to work because we had a 2-day paternity leave, and that's just for while you're at the hospital. This was quite a few years ago now. Saying that it was rough was truly an understatement. I should have been the happiest guy in the world. My son was born. He's healthy. And I tried to put up that facade, and I kept everything in. Those challenges that I had was I had to rely on my faith for strength. I've been doing that for quite a long time. The Best of Bob Marley CD to keep me calm. I love some Bob Marley, and video games to take my minds off things, because sometimes it was just getting too much and I could disappear into that world of virtual reality and have fun there. My mom ended up passing 3 weeks after my son was born. And after the mourning period subsided, things started getting a little bit easier for me. And looking back at it, I would say that the hardships and misfortunes that I experienced growing up helped build my resiliency levels to know that I could fall back on some of those strategies to help me get through that. Eventually, I did use Military One Source to get completely out of my doldrums and get me to this point where I can share these stories with others to encourage you that you'll be okay. There's a lot of hardships that we'll face. And as long as you find those strategies that'll help you, you will be okay. I can say, coming from joint assignments, The Air Force has the best culture in place to help with resiliency. We have numerous programs such as Military One Source, the Key Support Liaisons, and our Wing Level Director of Psychological Health. With that whole ready now thought process, I mentioned it before, resiliency is a key part, not just for the mission, but also for you writing your life story. Build that resiliency, get the help as you need it, and we'll be here to push you along the entire way.
I want to say my condolences on the loss of your mom. I lost my mom a few years back. I have an idea of the difficulty that brings to your life. But I also want to talk about the difference in the mindset of resiliency and bouncing back in the Air Force versus other branches. Having crossed over from the Army, I could definitely say the Air Force has a different, and I don't know if I would say better, but perhaps more accessible perspective on resiliency and bouncing back. You talked about it. Military life can be a grind, and reservists face different challenges than their active duty counterparts. Let's talk a little bit about balancing those commitments, especially you've gone through the whole gamut of reservist statuses, right? IMA, TR, active duty. Talk a little bit about how you balance that, and then what advice you would offer to the airmen as they try to balance those things.
It can be difficult at times, especially when we're asking you to do more, trying to keep the weekend to allow you to do your jobs. When you're at home, let's get those CBTs done. Hey, I need you to sign this. And it does become difficult. I think back to my airman NCO days where I showed up for the weekend, I got everything done, and then that was it. I was back to being a student. I went back to work to the various jobs I was working, and then I'd come back in on the weekend and do it all again and then go back home. Sometimes that works fine for people. And if that's pretty much what you're wanting to do, as long as you realize when it comes time for awards, it comes time to get put up for boards, it's a little bit more challenging for that. Now, I'm not saying you need to go do commitments outside the Air Force or do Air Force time on your own time. But as you move up into the ranks, there is that expectation that, hey, sometimes we got to do a little bit more. And that's where it comes, getting those RMP days to help pay for the hours that you're doing outside of a UTA weekend. Sometimes doing point only credit if no money is available, finding those different things. And it can be difficult to balance that. I can tell you as a command chief, it's not truly a full part-time job. I can't just show up for the weekend and do stuff. I constantly managing stuff throughout the week. But on the other side of it, making sure I'm taking care of myself and getting paid for it, getting credit for it, and ensuring that. Now, not everybody has that flexibility. And if you're in that point of your life, you don't have that flexibility to do some of those commitments, then it's something that we need to look forward that, hey, this is where I'm at right now. I'm comfortable with it. And moving forward, maybe a few years down the road, I'm ready to move up to supervisor and I have a little bit more flexible civilian job. Maybe my home life is better, that I can get out and actually do more stuff. And it's just being comfortable realizing I can't really do much more right now. And this is where I'm at. And also making sure your supervisors, your leadership understands that you're in that spot right now. Now, how I balance it is it's my civilian job can be very demanding sometimes, and sometimes it's very slow. So I try to take advantage during the slow times, and I disappear, unfortunately, during the very demanding times. I also run my own business, so I have to fit that into all the things that I do. On top of that, I also coach my son and daughter's soccer team, so I had to fit all of that in there. I'm a very busy guy. I'm used to that busy lifestyle, but not everyone's like that, and I understand and respect that. Some of the points that I'd share to fight you feeling that grind is, one, figure out what's best for you. Are you able to do some extra time? Great. Are you not able to? Then just let your leadership know that, hey, I know you have these expectations of me, but I have to work. I have all these other commitments outside of the Air Force, and make them understand that it's fine for that to be okay. The second part is taking care of yourself. Make sure you're getting credit for the days you do. I can't tell you how many days I've done in the past where I never got paid for, and it comes to bite you in the butt a lot later, because now, since I didn't get orders for those, I didn't get credit for them when I retire, I'm not going to get paid for those days either when I turn 60. So making sure you're taking care of yourself. The third thing is probably the most important one, is finding that great balance. As a younger airman, as an NCO, you may have more time to actually do stuff outside of the Air Force, But as you move up in the ranks, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Finding that balance. How much during the day, during the week, during the month do I want to commit to the Air Force? And how much do I want to outside of my life? One of the best things I ever heard from active duty guy was talking about the reserve is, hey, this guy can choose where he wants to go serve, when he wants to serve, and how long he wants to serve for. And remember, you join the Air Force Reserve to allow you to do that. So if your commitment is the minimum, make sure your supervisor knows that. If you want to go and do a little bit more, let your supervisor know that. If you want to go on orders, talk to your supervisor. It's that whole feedback, that communication, finding things to develop. And that's the best way that you could be able to balance all of that.
Outstanding. Chief, you're a storyteller. I'm the PA guy, so I like to listen to stories. I like to tell my own stories. We could probably be here all afternoon, but I do really appreciate you taking this time, and I hope this has been an opportunity for airmen to get an idea of what their new senior enlisted leader is thinking, what he's focusing on, and how they can engage with you to improve themselves and their performance here at the unit. Chief Birk, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you when you're out at the unit next.
Thank you.
Before we go, here are some announcements for the first UTA of 2025. In case you hadn't heard, the DoD has suspended the Trusted Traveler program at installations across the country, including Joint Base San Antonio, in light of recent events. That means all members in a vehicle must present a DoD ID or base pass when entering any of the gates on JBSA. Please be aware. The Alamo Wing's 14th annual awards banquet is happening next month on February 1st, which is the Saturday of the February UTA. Tickets are now on sale. The command chief sent out the details via email, including the link to purchase tickets. Heads up, they are first come, first serve, so don't wait. Speaking of annual awards, the nomination packets for all categories are due by Monday, January 12th at 16:30. JBSA is hosting a Hiring Our Heroes Military Spouse program on January 15th and 16th. The program will be offering training on job skills such as resume writing and interviewing, followed by a career fair geared towards military spouses. For more details, look on the Hiring Our Heroes website. That's going to do it for this episode of Ready, Set, Airlift. We appreciate you joining us. As always, we hope you stay safe and have a productive UTA. I've been your host, Julian Hernandez, from the 433rd Airlift Wing Public Affairs Team, signing off.